The great hall of Ironhold reeked of death and burning pine. Torches flickered against stone walls as hundreds of warriors gathered to honor their fallen jarl, Bjorn the Unyielding, who had died defending their village from shadow creatures 3 days prior. His body lay motionless on the funeral pyre, ready for the flames that would carry his spirit to Valhalla. But Astrid wasn't ready to let him go. She was no ordinary shield-maiden. She was the last of the Volva, wielding ancient magic her people had forgotten. As the torches moved closer to the pyre, she pressed her hand to Bjorn's chest and whispered words in the old tongue, words that could damn her soul. Suddenly, his eyes snapped open. His chest heaved with impossible breath. The hall erupted in gasps and cries of witchcraft, but Astrid knew the horrifying truth. This wasn't resurrection. The shadow curse was spreading through his veins, and soon he would become the very monster he died fighting. She had perhaps an hour before the man she loved would turn into something that would slaughter everyone in this hall. But what if saving him meant embracing the darkness herself? He still breathes. Astrid's voice cut through the chaos like a blade through flesh. The hall fell silent, hundreds of eyes fixed on the impossible sight before them. Bjorn's massive frame convulsed on the pyre, his battle-scarred hands clawing at empty air. But where his eyes should have held the warm brown of summer earth, an unsettling darkness swirled like storm clouds gathering strength. Astrid saw the truth that others missed, thin black veins spreading beneath his pale skin like spiderwebs of corruption. "Sorcery!" old Henrik spat from the crowd, his weathered face twisted with fear. "The witch has defiled our jarl's body." Warriors reached for their weapons, steel singing as blades cleared scabbards. These men had fought beside Bjorn for decades, but they would not hesitate to cut him down if darkness had claimed him. Astrid stepped protectively in front of the pyre, her own sword already in hand. "Stand down," she commanded, her voice carrying the authority of one who had earned her place through blood and valor. "I will handle this." Bjorn's eyes found hers, and for a moment she saw recognition flicker in those dark depths. His lips moved, forming her name without sound. Then his back arched in agony, a low growl escaping his throat that no human voice should make. The shadow curse was ancient, older than the gods themselves. Astrid had learned of it from her grandmother's forbidden texts, hidden away in the depths of their family's secret chamber. The creatures that had attacked Ironhold were merely servants of something far worse, a primordial darkness that sought to corrupt everything it touched. When its claws had found their mark on Bjorn's flesh, the curse had begun its work immediately. Death was meant to stop its progression, but Astrid's magic had unknowingly given it new life to feed upon. "What did you do to him?" Ingrid, Bjorn's sister, pushed through the crowd. Her own shield hung across her back, and her hand rested on her axe handle. "That thing wearing my brother's face? What is it?" Astrid's mind raced. She could try to explain, but these people wouldn't understand the complexities of ancient magic. They saw only their beloved leader writhing in apparent torment, black veins spreading across his skin like infected wounds. "The shadow creatures that attacked us carried a curse," she said, choosing her words carefully. "It was dormant while he lived, but my attempt to call him back gave it power." Bjorn's breathing grew ragged, each exhale releasing wisps of darkness that seemed to absorb the torchlight around them. The temperature in the hall dropped noticeably, and several warriors stepped back involuntarily. Astrid knew what came next. She had seen it in her grandmother's journals, accounts of other warriors who had fallen to this same corruption. First came the transformation of flesh, then the hunger for violence that could never be satisfied. Within the hour, Bjorn would become something that existed only to spread the curse to others. But there was another way, a ritual her bloodline had guarded for generations, though none had ever been desperate enough to attempt it. The Volva could take the curse into herself, using her magical abilities to contain it where others could not. She would become a vessel for the darkness, trapping it within her own soul to prevent its spread. The cost would be everything she was. Her magic would be corrupted, a mind slowly consumed by shadow. She might last days or weeks before the darkness claimed her completely, but it would give them time to find another solution, if one existed. Bjorn's eyes met hers again, and this time she saw awareness there. He understood what was happening to him. His hand moved slightly, fingers curling in the gesture they had used as children when making promises to each other. Astrid's breath caught. Even as the curse consumed him, her husband was trying to tell her something. His sacrifice had saved Ironhold once. Now it was her turn to save them all, including him. The funeral pyre crackled against the twilight sky, casting dancing shadows across the faces of the assembled warriors. Astrid stood motionless at the water's edge, her weathered hands gripping the torch that would send her husband to Valhalla. 3 days had passed since Magnus the Ironbreaker had fallen in battle against the Saxon raiders. 3 days since she had watched the life drain from his storm-grey eyes. The entire clan had gathered on the rocky shore of Skaldfjord. Magnus's longship bobbed gently in the dark waters, laden with his weapons, his gold, and offerings for the gods. His body lay upon the deck, wrapped in his finest cloak, the wolf pelts he had worn into countless battles now serving as his shroud. The sun fades. Astrid, rumbled Bjorn One Eye, Magnus's oldest friend and second in command. The tide turns soon. We must send him now while the winds favor his journey. Astrid nodded but did not move. She had led raids alongside Magnus for 15 years, had stood shield to shield with him against enemies that would have broken lesser warriors. Yet now, facing this final act, her courage faltered. Once she threw this torch, once the flames consumed his body and the ship carried him beyond the horizon, Magnus would truly be gone. He fought like 10 men at the end, whispered young Einar, barely old enough to grow a proper beard. Took down 6 Saxons before their spears found him. Aye, Astrid replied, her voice steady despite the storm in her heart. He died as he lived, with honor. She raised the torch high, preparing to hurl it toward the ship. The crowd fell silent save for the whisper of wind through the pine trees and the gentle lapping of waves against stone. Even the children stopped their restless shuffling. But as her arm began its forward arc, something impossible happened. Magnus sat up. The collective gasp from 200 warriors echoed across the water like thunder. Several men stumbled backward, hands flying to hammer pendants and protective charms. Others reached for weapons, uncertain whether they faced miracle or nightmare. Magnus's eyes snapped open, wild and unfocused. His mouth opened wide as he drew in a great shuddering breath, the first he had taken in 3 days. The sound was horrible, like wind through a broken cave. Magnus! Astrid dropped the torch and plunged into the icy fjord without hesitation. The water struck her like a physical blow, but she drove forward with powerful strokes, her mail shirt dragging at her limbs. Behind her, chaos erupted. Some warriors fell to their knees in awe, believing they witnessed divine intervention. Others shouted warnings about Draugr and walking dead. Bjorn's voice rose above the tumult, barking orders to launch the smaller boats. Astrid reached the longship first, hauling herself over the side with desperate strength. Magnus sat amid the funeral goods, his hands clawing at the wrappings around his throat. His skin held a sickly pallor, almost grey in the firelight, and dark veins showed clearly beneath the surface. "My love," she breathed, reaching toward him. Magnus's gaze fixed on her, and for a moment recognition flickered in his eyes. "Astrid!" His voice was a harsh whisper, as if he had forgotten how to speak. What happened?" "You died," she said simply, taking his face in her hands. His skin felt cold as winter stone. 3 days ago. The Saxons. Memory crashed back into his features, bringing pain and confusion. I remember falling. I remember darkness, and then something else, something that spoke without words. He gripped her wrists with surprising strength, something that wouldn't let me go. The first of the pursuit boats arrived, Bjorn leaping aboard before it had fully stopped. His weathered face was grim as he studied Magnus, one hand resting on his sword hilt. "This is not natural," he said quietly. The dead do not return unchanged." As if to confirm his words, Magnus suddenly convulsed. His back arched, and a sound escaped him that was neither human nor animal. A low, resonant howling that seemed to come from somewhere deeper than his throat. The dark veins beneath his skin pulsed with their own rhythm, separate from any heartbeat. When the fit passed, Magnus collapsed against Astrid, trembling. "Something is wrong with me," he whispered. "I can feel it inside, like ice in my bones. And I'm hungry, but not for food." His eyes met hers, and she saw fear there, real terror from a man who had never backed down from any earthly threat. "Astrid, I think I may be cursed." She held him tighter, feeling the unnatural cold radiating from his body. Around them, the funeral goods seemed to mock their joy at his return. The weapons gleamed like teeth in the torchlight, and the gold reflected their faces in twisted, unrecognizable forms. Then we'll break it," she said firmly. "Whatever dark magic holds you, we'll find a way." But even as she spoke the words, Astrid wondered what price such a breaking might demand. The great hall fell silent as Astrid's words echoed off the smoke-blackened timbers. Even the crackling of the central fire seemed muted, as if the flames themselves held their breath. Bjorn's chest rose and fell with labored gasps, his eyes darting wildly between the faces gathered around him. "Cursed?" Harold the Red stepped forward, his weathered hand moving instinctively to the iron hammer pendant at his throat. What manner of curse could reach beyond death itself? Astrid knelt beside her husband, studying the strange patterns that continued to writhe beneath his pale skin like living shadows. The marks had spread since his awakening, creeping up his neck in twisted spirals that hurt to look upon directly. When she touched his forehead, his skin burned fever-hot despite the deathly pallor. "The Seder magic of the old ways," she whispered, her voice barely audible, but twisted, corrupted into something far darker. Bjorn's mouth opened and closed soundlessly, his throat working as if trying to form words that would not come. His eyes, once the clear blue of summer skies, now held flecks of unnatural silver that shifted and swirled like mercury in the firelight. Old Thora pushed through the crowd, her gnarled staff tapping against the wooden floor, the Volva's clouded eyes fixed on Bjorn with an intensity that made the younger warriors step aside. She had served as seer and wise woman for longer than most could remember, her knowledge of the old magics unquestioned. "Let me see him," she commanded, settling her ancient bones beside the fallen warrior. Her fingers, twisted with age but steady with purpose, traced the air above the dark markings without quite touching them. A low hum escaped her throat, a sound that seemed to resonate in the very walls of the hall. Bjorn's back arched suddenly, a strangled cry tearing from his lips. The sound was wrong, too deep, echoing with harmonics no human throat should produce. Several of the watching warriors backed away, hands moving to weapon hilts. "Bind him," Thora ordered sharply. "The darkness fights to keep its hold." Strong hands moved quickly, securing Bjorn's thrashing limbs with leather strips. Astrid helped hold him steady, ignoring the unnatural heat radiating from his body, and the way his silver-flecked eyes seemed to look through her to something else entirely. 3 days and 3 nights he lay among the dead, Thora murmured, her examination continuing. "Long enough for the curse to take deep root. This is no simple magic, child. Someone with great power and greater malice has marked him." "But why?" Astrid's voice cracked with desperate emotion. "Bjorn has many enemies, yes, but what enemy possesses such dark knowledge?" The Volva's expression grew troubled. She reached into the leather pouch at her belt and withdrew a handful of carved bone runes, scattering them across the floor near Bjorn's head. They fell in patterns that made her intake breath sharply. "The runes speak of betrayal from within," she said slowly. "One who knew him well, who had access to his blood or belongings. The curse was cast before the battle. It was meant to ensure his death, but something went wrong. Instead of claiming him completely, It has trapped him between the world of the living and the realm of the dead. Astrid felt ice form in her veins despite the warmth of the hall. Someone here? One of our own people? The runes do not lie, Thora replied grimly. She gathered the bone pieces and cast them again. This time they formed a pattern that made several warriors mutter protective charms. But there is more. The curse feeds on his life force, growing stronger with each passing moment. If it is not broken soon, it will consume him entirely and then spread to others. How long do we have? Harold demanded. Days, perhaps less. Thora's ancient face was grave as stone, and breaking such a curse. She trailed off, her eyes meeting Astrid's with unmistakable sorrow. Tell me, Astrid said firmly, whatever the cost. The curse can only be broken by one bound to him by blood or sacred oath. The ritual requires the willing sacrifice of that person's own life force, all of it. The breaker of the curse will take the darkness into themselves, allowing the cursed one to live free. The hall erupted in angry voices, warriors shouting their objections and alternative suggestions, but Astrid heard none of it. She stared down at Bjorn's tormented face, watching the silver corruption spread further through his eyes. Her husband, her fierce, proud, impossible husband, who had pulled her from a burning village and taught her to fight like the wind itself. There must be another way, she whispered. Thora's gnarled hand settled on her shoulder. If there is, child, it lies beyond my knowledge. The old magics demand balance. Death for life, darkness for light. Bjorn's eyes suddenly focused on Astrid's face, and for just a moment they cleared of their silver taint. His lips formed a single soundless word. No. Then the darkness surged back, and he screamed. The salt wind cut through Astrid's cloak as she stood at the edge of the burial mound, watching the final stones being placed over what should have been Bjorn's eternal resting place. The hollow scraping of rock against earth echoed her own emptiness. 3 days had passed since he'd drawn that impossible breath, since the dead had returned to speak her name. 3 days of whispered conversations behind closed doors, of suspicious glances, of fear masquerading as reverence. The jarl requests your presence. Gunnar's voice broke through her reverie. Her husband's oldest friend approached with careful steps, his weathered face etched with concern that went deeper than grief. She turned from the mound, pulling her cloak tighter. What does Ragnar want now? To understand what happened, as do we all. Gunnar fell into step beside her as they walked toward the great hall. Astrid, there are stories spreading. People are afraid. Let them whisper. Fear won't change what we witnessed, but it might change what they do about it. The great hall buzzed with nervous energy when they arrived. Conversations died as Astrid passed, faces turning away or studying her with barely concealed unease. At the high table, Jarl Ragnar sat flanked by his advisors, his silver beard braided with rings that caught the firelight. His eyes, sharp as winter ice, fixed on her immediately. Astrid Ironwill, his voice boomed across the hall. Come, sit. She approached the high table but remained standing. I'll hear what you have to say from here, Ragnar. A murmur rippled through the gathered warriors. The Jarl's jaw tightened, but he nodded slowly. Very well. We've had reports of unusual occurrences, livestock found drained of blood, strange lights seen over the burial grounds. The Volva speaks of dark magics stirring in our lands. And you think this connects to Bjorn? I think, Ragnar leaned forward, that the dead don't return without consequence. Tell me again what you saw. Astrid's hand instinctively moved to the silver hammer pendant at her throat. I've told you already. He breathed. He spoke my name, nothing more. The seers say otherwise. The voice came from the shadows near the hearth. Astrid turned as an ancient woman emerged, her blind eyes milky white, her gnarled fingers wrapped around a staff carved with runes. Helga the seer commanded respect even from jarls, her visions having guided their people through countless battles. Helga. Astrid inclined her head respectfully. Child, the old woman's voice cracked like dry wood. I have seen your husband's fate in the smoke and flames. He walks between worlds now, neither living nor dead, bound by threads of shadow and malice. The hall fell silent except for the crackling of the central fire. Astrid felt her heart hammering against her ribs. What kind of binding? Blood magic, ancient and cruel. Helga moved closer, her unseeing gaze somehow finding Astrid's face. Someone called him back, but not from kindness. He is trapped, and his suffering echoes across the vale. Then tell me how to free him. Helga's laugh was bitter as winter wind. Freedom comes with a price that would break even one such as you, Iron Wolf. The curse can only be severed by willing sacrifice, a life freely given in exchange for his release. Then I'll... No. The old woman's staff struck the wooden floor with finality. Not any life. The life of his heart's truest bond. And should you succeed in breaking the curse, the magic will demand its due. Both souls will face judgment in the realm of the dead. Astrid stared at the seer, her mind racing. You're saying I could free him, but we'd both die? I'm saying the path to salvation runs through the valley of sacrifice. Whether you emerge on the other side depends on forces beyond my sight. Jarl Ragnar stood, his chair scraping against the floor. This is madness. Astrid, you cannot seriously consider... I can, and I will. She turned to face the assembled warriors. Bjorn fought beside you, bled for you, led you to victory when other men would have fled. If there's a chance to free him from this torment, I'll take it, even if it means your death. Gunnar stepped forward, his eyes pleading, especially then. She looked back at Helga. What must I do? The seer's fingers traced patterns in the air, as if reading invisible runes. The one who cast this curse grows stronger with each passing day, feeding on your husband's trapped spirit. You must find the source of the binding, likely an object containing his blood or essence, and destroy it while speaking the words of unbinding. And the sacrifice will be required at the moment of breaking, your life forced to sever the magical bonds. Helga's expression softened slightly. Child, there may be another way, but the paths are clouded. Dark magic obscures even my sight. Astrid nodded grimly. Then I'll forge my own path, as I always have. She turned toward the hall's entrance, her decision crystallizing with each step. If anyone tries to stop me, they'll answer to my blade. The ancient runes carved into the cavern walls seemed to pulse with their own malevolent heartbeat as Astrid traced her fingers along the cold stone. Each symbol told a story of binding, of souls trapped between worlds, of magic so dark it had been forbidden, even among the Volva who walked freely between life and death. Ragnar shouldn't have come here, she whispered, her breath forming small clouds in the frigid air. The deeper they ventured into the mountain's belly, the more wrong everything felt. The very air seemed thick with malice, pressing against her lungs with each breath. Behind her, Ragnar moved with mechanical precision, his footsteps eerily silent despite his massive frame. When she glanced back, his eyes held that same glassy emptiness that had terrified her since his resurrection. He was there, but not there, a wolf without its spirit, following her deeper into darkness. The tunnel opened into a vast chamber where shadows danced without flame to cast them. At its center stood a circle of black stones, each one inscribed with binding runes that hurt to look upon directly. The air above the circle shimmered like heat waves, but cold emanated from it instead of warmth. The Hellgate, Astrid breathed, recognizing it from the eldest skald's most forbidden tales. This was where the boundary between worlds grew thin, where desperate souls could bargain with powers that should never be disturbed. A figure emerged from the shadows beyond the circle, tall, draped in robes that seemed woven from night itself. The Volva's face was ageless yet ancient, beautiful yet terrible, with eyes like chips of winter ice. So, the Shieldmaiden comes at last, the sorceress said, her voice echoing strangely in the chamber. I have been waiting, child, waiting and watching, as your beloved struggled against my binding. Astrid's hand moved instinctively to her sword hilt. You're the one who cursed him. Release Ragnar, witch, or face my blade. The Volva laughed, a sound like wind through a graveyard. Your blade? Against me? Oh, sweet child, you understand so little. She gestured toward Ragnar, who stood motionless, staring at nothing. He came to me willingly, you know. Begged for my power when the fever took him. Liar. Am I? The sorceress circled them slowly, her robes whispering against the stone floor. He was dying, shield-maiden. The poison in his wound was beyond any healer's skill. In his delirium he called for power, power to return to you, to see your face once more. So I gave him what he desired. Astrid felt ice forming in her veins. What did you do to him? I bound his soul to mine, tethered his life force to my will. Death could not claim him because I would not allow it. But such magic demands a price, as all magic does. The Volva stopped before the stone circle, her pale hands tracing symbols in the air. Where her fingers passed, green fire sparked and died. Every day he remains bound to this world, he grows less himself and more mine. Soon, there will be nothing left of your Ragnar but an empty shell filled with my purpose. Then break the curse, Astrid demanded, stepping forward despite every instinct screaming at her to flee. Name your price. Ah, there's the fire I expected from Bjorn's daughter. The sorceress smiled, revealing teeth too sharp to be human. The price is simple, yet impossible. A life for a life, but not just any life. The binding can only be broken by one who loves him more than her own existence, who would willingly take his place in death's embrace. Astrid's heart hammered against her ribs. You want me to die so he can live? Not simply die, child. To break this particular curse, you must give your life force freely to restore his soul. But here is the cruel beauty of my spell. The moment you begin the ritual, both your souls will be vulnerable. If your love wavers even for an instant, if doubt creeps into your heart, you will both be consumed by the void between worlds, eternal torment instead of peaceful death. The chamber fell silent except for the distant sound of water dripping somewhere in the darkness. Astrid looked at Ragnar, searching his vacant face for any sign of the man she loved. For just a moment, she thought she saw a flicker of awareness, a glimpse of desperate pleading in his eyes, before they went empty again. There is another choice, the Volva said softly. Leave him here with me. In time, you'll forget the pain. Find another warrior, bear strong children, live a full life. He'll exist as my servant, but exist nonetheless. That's no existence at all, Astrid snarled. No, the sorceress agreed, but it's safe. The ritual I've described has never been completed successfully. Every soul who's attempted it has been lost to the void. Are you truly willing to risk not just your own destruction, but his eternal suffering for a chance that may not exist? The question hung in the air like a blade suspended over both their hearts. The ancient runes carved into the cave walls seemed to pulse with malevolent energy as Astrid traced her fingers along their jagged edges. Each symbol burned cold against her skin, and she pulled her hand back with a sharp intake of breath. The air itself felt thick with dark magic, pressing against her lungs like a suffocating shroud. These markings are older than the settlement, Bjorn whispered beside her, his weathered face grave in the flickering torchlight. Older than memory itself. Astrid nodded grimly. They had followed the trail of Eric's tormentor for 2 days through treacherous mountain passes, guided only by the faint magical signature that clung to her husband like a festering wound. The curse was growing stronger, and with each passing hour, Eric slipped further from the realm of the living into something far worse. Behind them, Eric stumbled against the cave wall, his movements jerky and unnatural. The warrior who had once moved with the fluid grace of a predator now lurched like a marionette controlled by an inexperienced puppeteer. Dark veins had begun spreading across his neck and face, creating a spider web of corruption beneath his pale skin. The binding grows tighter, came a voice from the shadows ahead, smooth and mocking. Soon, there will be nothing left of the great Eric Ironside but an empty shell for me to inhabit. Astrid's hand flew to her sword hilt as a figure emerged from the deeper recesses of the cave. The sorcerer was not what she had expected. Instead of some ancient, decrepit wizard, she found herself facing a man barely past his 20th winter. His pale eyes held an intelligence far beyond his years, and when he smiled, she glimpsed teeth filed to sharp points. Surprised, Shieldmaiden? You expected some withered crone, perhaps? Death magic has a way of preserving youth, though the cost— He gestured to his face, and Astrid saw the truth of it. His skin was flawless but held the waxy sheen of a corpse, and no breath stirred his chest. "What do you want with my husband?" Astrid demanded, drawing her blade in one fluid motion. The steel sang as it cleared the scabbard, and ancient runes along its edge began to glow with a pale blue light. The sorcerer's laugh echoed off the cave walls like the sound of grinding bones. "Want? I want nothing from him that I have not already taken. Your husband's body will be my vessel in the world of the living. Through him I will taste wine again, feel the warmth of fire, know the touch of flesh." His hungry gaze settled on Astrid, perhaps even know the warmth of his beautiful wife. Rage flooded through Astrid's veins like molten iron. She lunged forward, her sword cutting a brilliant arc through the darkness, but the sorcerer dissolved into shadow an instant before her blade could find its mark. His mocking laughter continued to echo around them as the darkness swirled and reformed several paces away. "Such fire," the sorcerer crooned. "I can see why Eric fought so desperately to return to you. Even from the threshold of death, your name was on his lips. That desperation, that love, it made him so very easy to snare." Behind them, Eric let out a low moan, doubling over as fresh waves of corruption spread across his skin. The curse was accelerating, feeding on the sorcerer's presence. Astrid could see her husband's eyes growing cloudier, the spark of recognition that still flickered there growing dimmer by the moment. "There's a way to break the binding," the sorcerer said casually, examining his pale fingernails. "Though I doubt you have the courage for it. Tell me," Astrid said through gritted teeth. "The curse feeds on the connection between your souls. Break that connection, sever the bond of love that ties you together, and the magic will have nothing left to anchor itself to. He will be free." The sorcerer's smile widened. "Of course, without that connection, he will also forget you completely. Every shared moment, every whispered endearment, every night spent in each other's arms, all of it will vanish as though it never existed." Astrid felt the world tilt around her. "You're lying." "Am I?" "Love is the strongest magic of all, Shieldmaiden. It can move mountains, conquer death itself, but it can also be weaponized, twisted into chains stronger than any iron." The sorcerer gestured toward Eric, who was now convulsing against the cave wall. "Choose quickly. In minutes, the transformation will be complete, and your choice will be made for you." Bjorn placed a heavy hand on Astrid's shoulder. "There has to be another way," he said desperately. But even as he spoke, Astrid knew there wasn't. She could see the truth written in the ancient runes surrounding them, could feel it in the magical currents that flowed through the cursed place. The sorcerer wasn't lying. He had woven the curse too cleverly, using their own love as the foundation for Eric's imprisonment. The only way to save her husband was to lose him forever. The ancient runestone stood twice Astrid's height, its surface carved with symbols that seemed to writhe in the flickering torchlight. She traced the weathered grooves with trembling fingers, each marking telling a story of power, sacrifice, and magic older than the gods themselves. The weight of what she'd learned pressed down upon her shoulders like a funeral shroud. "The binding curse of Hell's chosen," she whispered, reading the inscription aloud. "When death is cheated and life stolen back, the cursed one walks between worlds until the debt is paid in full." Bjorn stood behind her, his breath creating ghostly wisps in the cold mountain air. Even now, 3 days since his impossible awakening, his skin held the pallor of death. His heartbeat came irregularly, as if his body couldn't remember its proper rhythm. The curse mark on his chest had darkened further, spreading like black veins beneath his flesh. "What debt?" he asked, though his voice carried the hollow quality of wind through empty halls. Astrid continued reading. her warrior's training warring with the growing dread in her chest. The life force stolen must be returned threefold. The cursed one feeds upon the living, drawing strength from those closest to his heart until they too join him in the realm between life and death. The implications struck her like a physical blow. She spun to face her husband, seeing now what she'd tried to ignore, how her own strength had been waning since his return, how exhaustion crept into her bones after each touch, each kiss. He was killing her slowly, unconsciously draining her very essence to fuel his unnatural existence. Astrid, Bjorn reached for her, but she stepped back instinctively. Don't. The word came out sharper than she intended. She saw the pain flash across his features, followed by understanding. He looked down at his hands, as if seeing them for the first time. I'm killing you. Not by choice. She forced herself to step closer again, refusing to let fear drive a wedge between them. The curse compels it. You have no more control over this than you did over dying in the first place. A wolf howled somewhere in the darkness beyond their torchlight, answered by another, then another. The pack was growing restless. They'd been tracking Astrid and Bjorn for 2 days now, drawn by the scent of death magic that clung to him like smoke. There has to be a way to break it, Bjorn said desperately. Keep reading. Astrid turned back to the rune stone, squinting at the smaller symbols carved near its base. Her heart sank as she deciphered their meaning. The curse can only be broken by willing sacrifice. The one who loves the cursed most must give their life freely, sending both souls to their proper rest. No, Bjorn's voice carried the finality of an executioner's axe. There has to be another way. Or, Astrid continued, her voice barely above a whisper, the cursed one must return to death willingly, releasing their hold on the borrowed life before it consumes another soul completely. They stood in silence, the weight of impossible choices settling between them like a chasm. The wolves' howling grew closer, accompanied now by the sound of approaching hoofbeats. Their pursuers had found them. King's men, Bjorn said, his hand moving instinctively to his sword hilt. They've been hunting us since word spread of my return. King Harald had declared Bjorn's resurrection an abomination, a sign of dark magic that threatened the natural order. Dead heroes were meant to stay dead, not return to upset the careful balance of power. A living legend was far more dangerous than a martyred one. How many? Astrid asked, already checking her weapons. 12 riders, maybe more. And something else, something that reeks of sorcery. As if summoned by his words, a figure emerged from the tree line. Tall and gaunt, wrapped in robes the color of dried blood, it moved with the unnatural grace of something that had never been truly alive. Its face was hidden beneath a deep hood, but its voice carried the authority of ancient magic. Bjorn Ironside, son of Ragnar, you have defied the natural order. Come willingly, and your wife may yet live to see another dawn. And if I refuse, Bjorn called back, drawing his blade. Even cursed, even dying slowly, he remained every inch the warrior who had once struck fear into the hearts of kingdoms. Then we take her life force to fuel the ritual that will bind your soul to eternal servitude. The king has need of warriors who cannot die, even if they must be bound by darker chains. Understanding dawned like a cold sunrise. This had been planned from the beginning. The ambush that killed Bjorn, the curse that brought him back, even their flight to this ancient place of power. They'd been herded like sheep to slaughter, pawns in a larger game of magical politics. Astrid hefted her shield and drew her own sword, the familiar weight steadying her resolve. Then we die as we lived, together and fighting. The sorcerer raised one skeletal hand, and the very air around them began to thicken with malevolent energy. The ancient runes carved into the cave walls seemed to pulse with their own malevolent life as Astrid traced her fingers along the cold stone. Each symbol told a piece of the story she'd been desperately seeking, the origins of the curse that had claimed her husband's soul and left his body trapped between life and death. Here, she whispered, her breath forming small clouds in the frigid air. This speaks of the shadow-binding ritual. Bjorn stood behind her, his presence both comforting and haunting. 3 days of walking the line between the living and the dead had changed him. His skin held an unnatural pallor, and his eyes carried depths that seemed to reflect the very void itself. Yet he remained her husband, the man who had fought beside her through countless battles. "What does it say?" His voice carried an otherworldly echo that made her heart clench. Astrid's knowledge of the old script was limited, but desperation sharpened her understanding. A soul willingly given, bound in darkness, can only be freed by... She paused, her finger stopping at a symbol that made her blood run cold. By the willing sacrifice of what is most beloved. The silence that followed was deafening. Even the constant drip of water from the cave's ceiling seemed to pause, as if the very mountain held its breath. No. Bjorn's word cracked like a whip through the stillness. There must be another way. Astrid turned to face him, seeing the anguish that mirrored her own painted across his features. The Volva spoke truly. She knew what would be required. "I won't let you..." "You won't let me?" Fire flashed in her eyes. "Since when do you command my choices, husband? Have I not proven myself capable of deciding my own fate?" Bjorn stepped back as if struck. In life he had learned to respect her fierce independence. Death, it seemed, had not dulled his memory of that hard-won lesson. "This is different," he said, his voice softer now. "This is not battle. This is not glory. This is asking you to die for my sins." "Your sins?" Astrid laughed, but there was no humor in it. "What sin did you commit by defeating Grimnar in single combat? What wickedness was there in claiming victory for our people? I took his life. You took the life of a man who would have slaughtered innocents, who practiced the dark arts, who..." She stopped, something clicking into place. "The dark arts. Bjorn, how exactly did Grimnar die?" His jaw tightened. "You know how. My axe found his heart. But before that, in those final moments, what happened?" The silence stretched between them again, heavy with unspoken truths. Outside the cave, wind howled through the mountain passes like the voices of the dishonored dead. "He spoke words," Bjorn finally admitted, "in a tongue I didn't recognize. Ancient words that seemed to make the very air bleed. And you said nothing of this?" Astrid's voice was dangerously quiet. "What was there to say? Dead men often curse their killers. It means nothing. It means everything." She whirled back to the wall, frantically searching the runes. "Don't you see? He bound himself to you in those final moments. The curse isn't punishment, it's possession. He's trying to claim your body, your life force." The revelation hit them both like a physical blow. If Grimnar's spirit was attempting to possess Bjorn, then the true battle was far from over. "Then killing you won't break the curse," Bjorn said, hope creeping into his voice. "No," Astrid replied, her finger finding another passage. "But it might be the only way to strengthen you enough to fight him." She turned back to her husband. "The sacrifice doesn't break the curse. It gives you the power to break it yourself." Understanding dawned in Bjorn's eyes, followed quickly by revulsion. "You would die so I might have the strength to battle a dead sorcerer. I would die so you might live, so our people might be safe from Grimnar's influence." She stepped closer, placing her hand over his heart. Even through the cursed state of his existence, she could feel its irregular rhythm. "And so that when you finally join me in Valhalla, it will be with honor intact." "There must be another way," he repeated, but his voice lacked conviction. "If there were, do you think I wouldn't have found it?" Tears tracked down her cheeks, freezing almost instantly in the cave's bitter cold. "I've searched every text, consulted every wise woman between here and the great fjords. This is what the gods demand." They stood together in the ancient cave, surrounded by the weight of prophecy and the cruel mathematics of sacrifice. Somewhere, in the darkness beyond the runic walls, Astrid could almost feel Grimnar's malevolent presence growing stronger, feeding on Bjorn's life force while preparing to claim dominion over flesh that wasn't his own. The choice was becoming clearer with each passing moment. The only question that remained was whether they would have the courage to see it through. The bone-chilling howl that erupted from the cursed forest sent ravens scattering into the grey dawn sky. Astrid's grip tightened on her battle-axe as she pressed her back against the ancient runestone, its carved symbols pulsing with an otherworldly blue light. Somewhere in the mist ahead, Bjorn's tortured breathing echoed between the skeletal trees. "The curse grows stronger," whispered Einar, the elderly seer who had guided them through the night. His weathered fingers traced protective runes in the frost-covered ground. Each hour that passes binds him deeper to the realm of the dead. Astrid's jaw clenched as another inhuman sound tore from her husband's throat. 3 days since he had gasped back to life during his own funeral pyre, and each passing moment brought fresh horrors. The man she loved was disappearing, replaced by something caught between worlds, neither fully alive nor completely dead. "Tell me again what must be done," she demanded, though the seer's words from the previous night still burned in her memory like brands. Einar's milky eyes met hers with profound sadness. "The Valkyrie's curse can only be broken by willing sacrifice, one life freely given to restore another. But the price," he shook his head, "the one who breaks the curse will be erased not just from life, but from all memory. As if they never existed." The implications crashed over her like a frozen wave. Not only would she die, but every moment they had shared, every battle fought side by side, every whispered promise in the dark, all of it would vanish from the world as though it had never been. Bjorn would live, but he would never remember loving her. A branch snapped nearby. Through the swirling mist, Bjorn's silhouette emerged, but the sight made Astrid's heart fracture. His once proud frame was hunched and twisted, black veins spiderwebbing across his pale skin. His eyes, when they fixed on her, flickered between the warm brown she remembered and an empty, hungry void. "Astrid," he rasped, his voice like grinding stone. I can feel myself slipping away. The cold, it's spreading through everything. I see things, terrible things waiting for me in the darkness." She stepped forward despite Einar's warning gesture. "I'm here, my love. I won't let you fall." But even as she spoke, she saw him fighting against something invisible, his muscles straining as though battling phantom chains. The curse was dragging him back toward death, and each resistance cost him more of his humanity. "There must be another way," she said desperately to Einar. "Some other ritual, some different sacrifice." "There is none." The seer's voice carried the weight of absolute certainty. "I have searched through every ancient text, consulted with the spirits of the wise women who came before. This curse was crafted by Hell herself, woven with the threads of fate. Only perfect love can break such bonds, and perfect love demands perfect sacrifice." Bjorn suddenly doubled over, retching black bile onto the frozen earth. Where the dark liquid touched, the ground withered and died. When he straightened, more of his humanity had fled from his eyes. "The ritual must be performed at the heart of the cursed grove," Einar continued, pointing deeper into the twisted forest, "where the boundary between life and death grows thin. But know this, Shieldmaiden, once begun, there can be no turning back." Astrid closed her eyes, feeling the weight of impossible choice settling on her shoulders like a funeral shroud. In the distance, she could hear the sound of her kinsmen breaking camp, preparing to march home without their legendary warrior. They believed Bjorn was lost, that whatever had returned was merely a walking corpse animated by dark magic. Perhaps they were right. Perhaps the man she loved was already gone. But then Bjorn's hand, cold but unmistakably his, touched her cheek. When she opened her eyes, she saw him there, really him, fighting through the curse's grip to speak. "Whatever you're considering," he whispered with tremendous effort, "don't. I would rather face eternal torment than see you harmed. Promise me, Astrid, promise you won't." His words dissolved into another inhuman howl as the curse reasserted its hold, but she had heard enough. Even trapped between life and death, even losing more of himself with each breath, his first thought was protecting her. It was so perfectly, completely Bjorn that her heart nearly shattered. Einar gathered his ritual implements with grim efficiency. The choice must be made soon. Dawn approaches, and with it, the curse's final phase. After that, nothing in any realm can bring him back. Astrid hefted her axe and started walking toward the grove's dark heart. Behind her, Bjorn's anguished cries echoed through the mist, calling her name. She didn't look back. If she was going to save him, truly save him, she couldn't afford the luxury of doubt. The path to the ritual site wound deeper into shadow, each step carrying her closer to a choice that would echo through eternity. The ancient stone circle stood like broken teeth against the storm-darkened sky, each monolith carved with runes that seemed to writhe and shift in Astrid's peripheral vision. She pressed her back against the cold granite, bow drawn, as shadows moved between the stones with predatory grace. "Show yourselves, cowards!" she hissed through gritted teeth. The wind carried their answer, a chorus of inhuman laughter that made her skin crawl. 3 figures emerged from behind the standing stones, their forms shifting between solid flesh and wisping darkness. The Volva's servants, bound to her will by magic older than memory. Bjorn stood at the circle's center, swaying on his feet. The curse had grown stronger since they'd entered this cursed place, and she could see the fight draining from his eyes with each passing moment. His axe hung loose in his grip, the weapon that had cleaved through countless enemies now trembling in weakened hands. "The ritual begins at moonrise," one of the shadow servants spoke, its voice like grinding stone. "Your husband's soul will feed our mistress well." Astrid loosed an arrow that passed harmlessly through the creature's chest. It laughed again, the sound like breaking glass. She cursed under her breath. Conventional weapons were useless here. But the Volva had made one critical error in her arrogance. She'd assumed Astrid would come unprepared. From her pack, she drew the iron blade blessed by the temple priests in Hedeby. Its surface gleamed with holy oil and carved prayers, each symbol burning with soft silver light in the darkness. The shadow servants recoiled, their forms wavering. "Now you show proper fear," Astrid snarled, advancing. The first creature lunged, claws extended, but her blessed blade carved through its essence like smoke. It shrieked and dissipated, leaving only the stench of sulfur. The remaining 2 circled her warily, no longer laughing. Behind them, the Volva herself materialized from the shadows between the stones. She was ancient beyond measure, her face a map of wrinkles and scars, eyes like black pits that seemed to swallow light. Bone charms and iron talismans hung from her decrepit frame, clattering with each movement. "Clever girl," the witch croaked. "But blessed steel will not save your husband. The curse has taken root too deep. Soon he will be mine, and you will watch him become my eternal thrall." Bjorn stumbled forward, his movements no longer his own. The vacant look in his eyes sent ice through Astrid's veins. She could see him fighting against the compulsion, muscles straining, but the magic was too strong. "Fight it!" she shouted, parrying a strike from one of the remaining shadow servants. "Remember who you are, Bjorn Ironside. Remember your oath to me." For a moment, his steps faltered. Their eyes met across the circle, and she saw a flicker of recognition, of desperate love fighting against the darkness. But then the Volva raised her gnarled staff, muttering in the old tongue, and Bjorn's face went blank again. The shadow servants pressed their attack, forcing Astrid to give ground. Her blessed blade could harm them, but they were fast and cunning, using the stone pillars for cover and striking from unexpected angles. Blood ran from a gash across her ribs where claws had found their mark. The moon emerged from behind the storm clouds, its pale light flooding the circle. The runes carved into the standing stones began to glow with eldritch fire, and the very air seemed to thicken with malevolent energy. The ritual was beginning. "Kneel before your new mistress, Bjorn Ironside," the Volva commanded. Astrid watched in horror as her husband's knees began to bend. The curse was complete. In moments his soul would be bound forever to the witch's will. But as despair threatened to overwhelm her, she remembered the words of the old priest who had blessed her blade. "Sometimes, child, the greatest victory requires the greatest sacrifice." Understanding flooded through her like ice water. There was one way to break the curse, one ritual older and more powerful than the Volva's dark magic, the binding of souls, but it worked both ways. If she could forge a connection strong enough, she could pull Bjorn back from the brink, but it would require giving up part of her own life force, weakening her permanently. The remaining shadow servants closed in for the kill, but Astrid was no longer focused on them. She reversed her grip on the blessed blade and drew it across her palm, letting her blood drip onto the ancient stones. "By blood and bone, by heart and soul," she chanted in the Old Norse, words her grandmother had taught her long ago. "I bind myself to thee, Bjorn Ironside. As you are mine, I am yours. Let no magic sever what love has joined." The Volva's eyes widened in recognition and rage. "Foolish child, you'll destroy yourself!" "Perhaps," Astrid gasped as power flowed out of her, leaving her dizzy and weak. "But I'll take you with me." The stone circle erupted in blinding light as two ancient magics collided, and the very air screamed with unleashed power. The ancient stone circle loomed before them, like the teeth of some primordial beast, each monolith carved with runes that seemed to writhe and shift in the flickering torchlight. Astrid's breath misted in the frigid air as she helped Bjorn from his horse, his weight heavier against her shoulder than it had been even days before. The curse was winning. "The heart of winter's power," Ragnhild whispered, her voice barely audible over the howling wind that whipped through the standing stones. "Here, where the veil between worlds grows thin, we might yet save him." Bjorn's skin had taken on an alarming pallor, blue veins visible beneath flesh that felt cold as morning frost. His eyes, once blazing with the fury of battle, now flickered with an otherworldly light that made Astrid's stomach clench with dread. Still, when he looked at her, she saw flashes of the man she'd married, the warrior who'd carved his legend across countless battlefields. "I can feel it," he rasped, his voice like grinding ice. "The darkness, it whispers promises of power, of dominion over death itself. Sometimes I want to listen." Astrid cupped his face in her hands, forcing him to meet her gaze. "You are stronger than any curse, my love. You are Bjorn the Undaunted." A bitter laugh escaped his lips. "Am I? Or am I becoming something else entirely?" Ragnhild had already begun her preparations, drawing intricate symbols in the snow with a staff carved from what looked like blackened bone. The runes glowed with pale fire as she worked, each mark seeming to pulse with its own heartbeat. The air grew thick with magic so potent it made Astrid's teeth ache. "The ritual requires 3 elements," the Cedar woman explained without looking up from her work. "The cursed one must face his darkness willingly. The one who loves him must be prepared to follow him into shadow, and," she paused, her ancient eyes finding Astrid's, "one of them must choose to remain behind." The words hit Astrid like a physical blow. "What do you mean?" "The curse binds Bjorn between life and death. To free him completely, someone must take his place in that liminal space. The magic demands balance." Bjorn straightened despite his weakness, steel returning to his voice. "No, I won't let Astrid sacrifice herself for my sake." "And I won't let you remain cursed," Astrid shot back, her hand moving instinctively to the hilt of her sword. "We've come too far to fail now." The wind began to change, carrying with it sounds that had no place in the mortal world, whispers in languages that predated human speech, the clash of spectral weapons, the howling of wolves that cast no shadows. The curse was fighting back, sensing the threat to its hold. Ragnhild's chanting grew more urgent, her voice rising to match the supernatural cacophony. The runes carved into the standing stones began to glow, responding to her call. Ancient power stirred, magic so old it remembered when the world was young and the barriers between realms were gossamer thin. Bjorn doubled over suddenly, a cry of agony tearing from his throat. Dark veins spread across his skin like cracks in ice, and his eyes blazed with unnatural fire. The curse was making its final push, trying to claim him completely before the ritual could be completed. "Now," Ragnhild shouted over the growing maelstrom, "you must enter the circle together, face what comes with courage." Astrid and Bjorn stepped forward as one, crossing into the ring of standing stones. The world exploded into chaos around them. Shadows took shape, becoming twisted versions of enemies they'd slain, friends they'd lost, choices that haunted their dreams. The curse given form, every regret and fear made manifest. But they faced it together, as they had faced everything else. Astrid's blade sang through spectral flesh, while Bjorn fought with the desperate strength of a man reclaiming his soul. Each shadow they destroyed weakened the curse's hold, but the effort was taking its toll. Blood ran from wounds both real and spiritual, and Astrid could feel her strength ebbing. In the center of the circle, a figure began to materialize, the source of the curse itself. It was beautiful in its terrible majesty, a sorceress whose power had transcended death but twisted her into something monstrous. Her voice was honey laced with poison as she spoke. "You cannot break what was forged in desperation and sealed with dying breath. The warrior belongs to me now, as payment for mercy shown when none was deserved." Recognition dawned in Bjorn's eyes, cutting through the curse's fog. "Valdis," he breathed, "the healer's daughter. I tried to save you." The spectral sorceress smiled with infinite sadness and rage. "You tried, but I died anyway, watching my village burn while you fought elsewhere. In my final moments, I cursed your name and called upon powers that should never be invoked." The truth hung between them, like a blade poised to fall. The curse wasn't random. It was deeply personal, born of tragedy and perceived betrayal, and breaking it would require more than magic. It would require forgiveness. The ancient stones of the Norn's sanctuary loomed before them like the bones of sleeping giants, weathered smooth by countless winters, yet humming with power that made the air itself taste of copper and lightning. Astrid's fingers trembled as she traced the runic inscriptions carved deep into the entrance archway, each symbol pulsing with a faint blue light that seemed to respond to her touch. "The old stories spoke true," she whispered, her breath forming ghostly clouds in the suddenly frigid air. "The weavers of fate still dwell here." Behind her, Magnus swayed on his feet, the curse's grip tightening with each passing hour. His skin had taken on an ashen pallor that spoke of death's approach, and dark veins now spider-webbed across his arms like cracks in breaking ice. The brief moments of clarity were becoming rarer, replaced by longer stretches where his eyes held no recognition, no warmth, only the hollow hunger of the Draga he was becoming. "Astrid," his voice came out as barely more than a rasp. "I can feel it, clawing at my thoughts. If the Norns cannot help us—" She turned and pressed her palm against his chest, feeling the erratic rhythm of his failing heart. "They will help us. They must." The sanctuary's entrance yawned open at their approach, revealing a passage that descended into living stone. No torch lit their way, yet the walls themselves seemed to glow with an inner light that shifted and danced like aurora across ice. Their footsteps echoed strangely here, each sound multiplying until it seemed an army marched alongside them. The passage opened into a vast circular chamber where three figures sat at an enormous loom that stretched beyond sight in both directions. The Norns, Erd, Verdandi, and Skuld, wove the threads of fate with hands that moved in patterns too complex for mortal eyes to follow. One appeared as an ancient crone, her fingers gnarled but sure as she worked the threads of the past. Another bore the face of a woman in her prime, her touch shaping the present moment. The third seemed to shift between youth and age, her hands dancing among threads that sparkled with the light of things yet to come. "We know why you come," spoke the eldest without looking up from her work. Her voice carried the weight of mountains and the whisper of time itself. "The warrior cursed, the shield-maiden desperate. The threads of your fate have grown tangled indeed." Astrid stepped forward, forcing steel into her spine despite the overwhelming presence of the fates themselves. Then you know I'll pay any price to save him." The youngest Norn, or perhaps the oldest, for her face kept shifting, finally raised her eyes. They held the depth of starless nights and the fire of dying suns. "Any price, Shieldmaiden, even when that price is everything you hold dear? Tell me what must be done." The three sisters exchanged glances that seemed to carry entire conversations. The one weaving present moments spoke, her voice like wind through standing stones. "The curse that binds your husband is ancient, woven from malice and powered by life force stolen from the living. To break it requires a sacrifice of equal measure." Magnus stepped forward, his movement jerky as he fought against the curse's influence. "Then let me end this. Let me die truly and be done with it." "You misunderstand, warrior," the eldest said, finally looking up from her loom. "The curse feeds on your life, yes, but it is anchored to another. To break it, that anchor must be severed." Astrid felt ice form in her veins as understanding dawned. "The Volva. Grimhilda still lives." The middle sister nodded slowly. "She who cast the curse must die by the hand of she who seeks to break it. But the magic will exact its price. The life force she has stolen must go somewhere when released. It will flow into the one who strikes the killing blow." "And burn them from within," added the youngest, her shifting features settling momentarily into an expression of profound sadness. "No mortal form can contain such power and survive." The chamber fell silent save for the subtle whisper of threads being woven. Astrid stared at the Norns, her mind racing through the implications. To save Magnus, she would have to kill Grimhilda and die in the process. "There is no other way?" she asked, though she already knew the answer from their expressions. "Fate's threads, once woven, do not easily change," the eldest replied. "This is the price demanded. You may choose to pay it or walk away, but the curse will run its course regardless." Magnus reached for her with trembling hands. "Astrid, no, I won't let you." She silenced him with a kiss that tasted of tears and determination. When they parted, her eyes blazed with the same fierce light that had carried her through 100 battles. "Where is she?" The youngest Norn's form solidified into that of a woman barely older than Astrid herself, beautiful and terrible in her certainty. "She waits where this began, at the burial mound where your husband first died." The ancient stones of the cursed grove loomed before them, like the ribs of some primordial beast, their surfaces carved with runes that seemed to writhe in the dancing shadows cast by Astrid's torch. The air here felt thick, almost viscous, as if the very atmosphere resisted their presence. Magnus walked beside her, his breathing labored but determined, the curse's grip on him tightening with each passing hour. "The ritual circle lies beyond those stones," Astrid whispered, consulting the crumbling parchment they'd retrieved from the Volva's chambers. "But the text warns of guardians, spirits bound to protect the grove from those who would misuse its power." Magnus gripped his sword tighter, though Astrid noticed how his knuckles had begun to pale, the curse slowly draining the life from his extremities. "Then we face them together, as we always have." They passed between the towering megaliths, and immediately the temperature plummeted. Their breath misted in the sudden cold as shadows began to coalesce around them, taking the forms of ancient warriors, Vikings who had fallen in battles long forgotten, their spectral armor bearing the marks of mortal wounds. "Who dares disturb the sacred grove?" The voice came from everywhere and nowhere, a chorus of the dead speaking in unison. Astrid stepped forward, raising her torch high. "I am Astrid Ironshield, and this is Magnus the Oathkeeper. We seek to break a curse that binds his soul." The ghostly warriors circled them, their translucent forms leaving trails of pale light in the air. "Many have come seeking power over death. All have paid the price of their arrogance." "We seek not power," Magnus said, his voice carrying despite his weakening condition. "Only freedom from magic that was worked without consent, without honor." One spirit, taller than the rest and bearing a golden torque around his neck, approached them directly. Show us your hearts, mortals. Let us see the truth of your intentions. The world around them shifted, and suddenly Astrid found herself reliving moments from their past. Magnus shielding her from a berserker's axe during the Battle of Ravensfjord, taking a wound meant for her. Then she saw herself, years earlier, diving into icy waters to pull Magnus from beneath a sinking longship, nearly drowning in the process. Love and sacrifice woven together like threads in a tapestry. The Spirit King nodded slowly. Your bond is true, but know this, the ritual you seek to perform will test that bond beyond anything you have faced. Are you prepared to pay the ultimate price? What price? Astrid demanded, though part of her already knew the answer would shake her to her core. The curse can only be broken by willing sacrifice of equal measure, the Spirit explained. A life freely given, a soul willingly surrendered. One of you must die so that the other may truly live. Magnus staggered, the curse's effects accelerating in this place of ancient power. Dark veins had begun to spider across his chest, visible through his torn tunic. Then let it be me. I have already died once. What is once more? No. Astrid's voice cracked like a whip through the grove. We came here to save you, not to lose you again. She turned to the Spirit King, desperation giving her words fierce intensity. There must be another way, some other price we can pay. The ghost's expression remained impassive. The magic that binds him is fueled by malice and despair. Only an act of perfect love, the willing surrender of one's own life for another, can break such bonds. This is the law that governs the deepest magics. Around them, the other spirits began to fade, their forms becoming more translucent as the grove prepared for what was to come. Ancient braziers flickered to life around a circular platform of black stone, inscribed with symbols that hurt to look at directly. Magnus collapsed to one knee, his breathing now shallow and rapid. The curse was consuming him faster here, as if sensing the proximity of its potential end. Astrid, he gasped, reaching for her hand. If this is how it must be. She knelt beside him, her warrior's composure finally cracking. Tears she had held back for days now flowed freely down her cheeks. I will not lose you again. I cannot. But even as she spoke, her mind was working, turning over every word the Spirit had said, every line of the ritual text they'd studied. There had to be something they were missing, some alternative that didn't require one of them to die. The Spirit King watched them with something that might have been compassion on his ancient features. The choice must be made soon, he said gently. The curse will claim him within the hour, whether the ritual is performed or not. At least this way, his sacrifice would have meaning. Astrid looked between Magnus, growing weaker by the moment, and the ritual circle that promised salvation at an unbearable cost. The weight of the decision settled on her shoulders like a mountain, and she knew that whatever choice she made in the next few minutes would echo through eternity. The bone knife trembled in Astrid's grip as she pressed its edge against the pulsing darkness that had consumed Bjorn's chest. The cursed mark writhed like a living thing, black tendrils spreading beneath his skin with each labored breath. Around them, the ancient burial chamber seemed to pulse in rhythm with the malevolent magic, shadows dancing across carved runes that had witnessed countless rituals over the centuries. The binding words, Astrid, Ragnhild urged from behind her, the old seer's voice strained with urgency. Speak them now before the curse claims him completely. I offer my strength to break what binds him, she began, her voice barely a whisper. The bone knife grew warm in her hand, ancient magic recognizing the ritual's beginning. I offer my breath to fill his lungs, my heartbeat to drive his blood. The chamber shuddered around them as if the very stones protested the working of such magic. Dust rained from the ceiling, and somewhere in the darkness beyond their flickering torchlight, something growled, low and primal and wrong. Bjorn's back arched suddenly, a strangled gasp escaping his lips. The black mark on his chest pulsed brighter, spreading its corruption up his throat like grasping fingers. Astrid pressed the knife deeper, feeling resistance as the cursed flesh fought against the consecrated bone. "I offer my memories of joy to drive out sorrow," she continued, tears streaming down her face as she spoke the words Ragnhild had taught her. "My love to conquer hate, my light to banish shadow." The knife began to glow with pale silver fire, and where it touched the cursed mark, steam rose like morning mist. Bjorn convulsed, his hands clawing at the stone beneath him, but his eyes remained empty, staring at nothing. From the chamber's entrance came the sound of boots on stone. Magnus and the other warriors who had accompanied them stood guard, but their nervous voices carried clearly in the ancient space. Something was coming through the tunnels, drawn by the magic they worked here. The dead sorcerer's influence reached far, and his servants would not let their master's curse be broken easily. "Hurry!" Ragnhild hissed, glancing toward the sounds of approaching danger. "The binding must be completed before—" A howl echoed through the tunnels, neither fully human nor beast, cutting off her words. Whatever pursued them was close now. Astrid closed her eyes and spoke the final words, knowing their true cost. "I offer my life for his, my soul to pay the price of breaking what should not be broken. Let death take what it will, but let love triumph over darkness." The bone knife flared like a captured star, its light so brilliant that every shadow in the chamber fled to the farthest corners. The cursed mark on Bjorn's chest writhed and twisted, fighting against the binding's dissolution, but the ancient magic was stronger. Silver fire raced along the black tendrils, burning them away like cobwebs in a flame. Astrid felt something vital tear loose inside her chest, a sensation like ice water flooding her veins. The price the ritual demanded was steep, years of her life, perhaps decades, flowing out of her and into the working that would free her husband from his supernatural bondage. Her hair, already silver-streaked from grief and worry, turned completely white in moments. Lines appeared at the corners of her eyes, and her hands grew thin and fragile. But Bjorn's eyes suddenly focused, pupils contracting as they found her face. Colour flooded back into his cheeks, and the terrible cold that had surrounded him broke like frost before spring sun. "Astrid," he whispered, his voice hoarse but unmistakably alive, unmistakably himself. "My love," she breathed, reaching for him with trembling fingers. The howling in the tunnels grew louder, closer. Magnus shouted a warning that echoed off stone walls, followed by the ring of steel on claws and the battle cries of men facing something that should not exist. Ragnhild grabbed Astrid's shoulder, helping her to her feet. "We must go, now. The binding is broken, but the sorcerer's servants will not give up so easily." Bjorn sat up slowly, strength returning to limbs that had been cold and lifeless. He looked at Astrid, truly looked at her, and his expression crumpled as he saw what the ritual had cost. Her sacrifice was written in every new line on her face, every silver strand of hair. "What have you done?" he whispered. Before she could answer, something massive crashed into the chamber's entrance, and Magnus screamed. The ancient grove trembled as Astrid pressed the cursed blade deeper into Bjorn's chest, its black metal drinking hungrily from his life force. Around them, the twisted trees groaned and swayed despite the absence of wind, their gnarled branches reaching like skeletal fingers toward the blood moon hanging overhead. The very air crackled with malevolent energy as the curse fought against their desperate gambit. "The blade grows hungry for completion," Bjorn gasped, his calloused hand covering hers on the hilt. Blood, darker than midnight, seeped between his fingers and dripped onto the sacred stones beneath their feet. "I can feel it clawing at my soul, trying to drag me back to the shadow realm." Astrid's jaw clenched as she felt the weapon's corrupt whispers seeping into her mind, promising power beyond imagination if she would only drive it home completely. The curse recognized her as kindred, another warrior who had tasted death and violence, whose hands were stained with the blood of countless enemies. It called to the darkness that lurked in every fighter's heart. "Fight it!" she commanded through gritted teeth, though she wasn't certain whether she spoke to Bjorn or herself. The old witch said the curse could only be broken by willing sacrifice. You must choose to release it. Thunder rolled across the starless sky as Bjorn's body convulsed. The curse mark on his forehead blazed with sickly green light, spreading like poison through the veins beneath his skin. His eyes rolled back, showing only whites, and when he spoke, his voice carried the echo of the grave. Too late, Shieldmaiden. He belongs to us now. 3 days we held his spirit in our realm. 3 days we fed upon his essence and made him ours. You cannot undo what has already been claimed. Astrid snarled and twisted the blade, earning a shriek from both Bjorn and the entity possessing him. He is mine, demon, bound by oath and blood since we were children. Your claim means nothing against bonds forged in this world. The possessed warrior's lips curved in a terrible smile. Then join him. Take the blade fully into your own heart, and you can be together in eternal darkness. Is that not what love demands? For a heartbeat, Astrid wavered. The logical part of her mind, the part trained since girlhood to think tactically, whispered that she was being manipulated. But the desperate wife within her seized upon the possibility. If she could not save Bjorn, perhaps she could at least ensure they would not be separated again. Astrid, no. Bjorn's true voice cut through the supernatural discord, weak but unmistakably his own. Blood frothed at the corners of his mouth as he fought to reclaim control of his body. Remember what we learned in the catacombs. The curse feeds on despair and surrender. We must choose hope. She met his eyes, blue as winter ice, clear and focused, despite the pain racking his frame. In them, she saw not the fearsome berserker who had carved through enemy armies, but the boy who had promised to shield her from nightmares, who had sworn they would face whatever came together. The runes, she whispered, sudden understanding flooding through her. The binding runes we carved into our wedding rings. With her free hand, she grasped the simple iron band on her finger, feeling the ancient symbols they had etched there on their wedding night. Bjorn's eyes widened as comprehension dawned, and he pressed his ring against hers despite the agony it clearly caused him. The moment the carved runes touched, brilliant white light erupted from their joined hands. The cursed blade began to smoke and hiss where Astrid gripped it, but she held fast even as the metal burned her palm. The entity possessing Bjorn shrieked in fury and pain as the binding magic of their marriage vows, sworn before gods and witnessed by their people, blazed to life. "We are bound," Astrid declared, her voice ringing with absolute conviction. "In this life and beyond, by choice, not compulsion, by love, not fear, we are bound," Bjorn echoed, his voice growing stronger with each word. "And no curse can sever what we have willingly forged." The cursed blade cracked, hairline fractures spreading along its length as the competing magics warred within it. The grove filled with an otherworldly howling as the curse found itself trapped between the blade's hunger and the unbreakable bonds of true partnership. The possessed trees burst into flames that cast no heat, and the blood moon above began to pale. Astrid felt the exact moment when the curse broke, a sensation like chains snapping throughout her entire being. The blade crumbled to ash in her hands, and Bjorn collapsed against her, breathing hard but blessedly, undeniably alive and free. Around them, the grove began to return to its natural state, though the scars of this night's battle would linger long after they departed. But for now, in the growing dawn light, they held each other and prepared for whatever final trials awaited before their ordeal truly ended. The ancient runes carved into the obsidian altar pulsed with malevolent energy, their crimson glow casting dancing shadows across Astrid's face. She knelt before the cursed stone, her battle-worn hands trembling as she placed the ceremonial dagger against her palm. Behind her, Bjorn's labored breathing echoed through the cavernous chamber like a dying wind. "There must be another way," he rasped, his voice barely audible above the whispers of the damned that seemed to seep from the very walls. The curse had ravaged his body further since they'd entered this forsaken place. His skin now bore the pallor of death itself, and dark veins spider-webbed across his arms like poisonous rivers. The chamber shuddered around them, ancient magic responding to the offering. Somewhere in the darkness, beyond the altar's light, something moved, shadows that had no earthly form, reaching toward the promise of release from their eternal torment. These were the spirits bound to the curse, trapped in service to whatever dark entity had first claimed Bjorn's soul. "I won't let you do this." Bjorn struggled to his feet, his massive frame swaying dangerously. Even diminished by the curse, he was still formidable, still the legendary berserker who had carved his name in blood across a dozen battlefields. But love made him vulnerable in ways no enemy ever could. Astrid stood slowly, the dagger still clutched in her grip. "You would have done the same for me. You know this. That's different." "How?" Her green eyes blazed with fierce determination. "Because you're the great Bjorn Ironside? Because your life matters more than mine?" She stepped closer to him, close enough to see the pain etched in every line of his weathered face. "I am your equal in all things, husband. In battle, in love, and in sacrifice." The curse mark on his chest, a twisted symbol burned into his flesh during his 3 days among the dead, began to glow with the same crimson light as the altar. The connection between them was unmistakable now, a supernatural chain that bound his soul to this place of shadows and whispered torments. "The witch said the curse feeds on despair," Astrid continued, her voice growing stronger with each word. "It grows stronger every moment you remain trapped between life and death. How long before it spreads beyond you? How long before it claims our people, our children yet unborn?" Bjorn's hand found the hammer pendant at his throat, the symbol of Thor that had protected him through countless battles. But even the thunder god's blessing seemed powerless against the dark magic that had ensnared him. There might be another way. We could seek out the Volva of the northern wastes, or... "There is no time." Astrid's words cut through his desperate hopes like her axe through enemy shields. "Look at yourself, my love. You're fading even now." She was right, and they both knew it. The curse was consuming him from within, turning his legendary strength against itself. Already he could feel parts of his memory slipping away, fragments of their life together becoming hazy and indistinct. Soon there would be nothing left but the hollow shell of a man, animated by malevolent purpose. The altar's hunger grew more insistent, the runes now pulsing in rhythm with Astrid's heartbeat. The shadows pressed closer, and she could hear voices among them, the whispered pleas of other warriors who had fallen to similar curses, forever bound to serve the darkness that had claimed them. "If I do this," she said quietly, "promise me something." Bjorn moved closer, his eyes never leaving her face. "Anything. Don't let my sacrifice be meaningless. Live, truly live. Take a new wife if you must, father strong children, grow old and die in your own bed surrounded by loved ones." Her voice caught slightly. "Don't spend your remaining years mourning what was lost. Celebrate what was saved." He reached for her then, his calloused hands cupping her face with infinite tenderness. "I love you, shield-maiden, in this life and whatever comes after. And I love you, berserker." She smiled then, fierce and radiant despite the tears that tracked down her cheeks. "Now stand back. The magic requires willing sacrifice, not shared destruction." Bjorn stepped away, his fists clenched at his sides. Every instinct screamed at him to stop her, to find another path, but he knew as well as she did that some battles could only be won through loss. Astrid raised the dagger above her heart, the blade catching the crimson light. The altar's hunger reached a crescendo, and the shadows surged forward like a breaking wave, eager to witness the completion of the ritual that would finally set them all free. The obsidian blade trembled in Astrid's grip as she stood before the ancient altar, its surface slick with centuries of sacrificial blood. Eric lay motionless beside her, his breathing shallow and labored, the curse's black veins spreading like poison ivy across his pale skin. They had perhaps minutes before it claimed him entirely. "The ritual must begin at the moment between heartbeats," whispered Valdis, the crone's voice barely audible above the howling wind that had begun to spiral around the sacred grove, "when life and death dance closest together." Astrid nodded, though her hands shook. The weight of what she was about to do pressed down upon her shoulders like the weight of Mjolnir itself. To break the curse that bound Eric's soul, she would have to sever their life bond. The mystical connection forged when they first pledged themselves to each other beneath the northern lights. It was a bond that had made them stronger in battle, allowed them to sense each other's thoughts and emotions across great distances. Breaking it would free Eric, but the magical backlash would likely kill them both. There must be another way, Eric rasped, his eyes fluttering open. Even through his agony, his gaze held the same fierce protectiveness that had made him legendary among their people. There is no other way, my love. Astrid knelt beside him, pressing her forehead against his. The sorceress who cursed you made certain of that. She knew that to save you, I would have to destroy us both. Thunder crashed overhead as dark clouds gathered with unnatural speed. The curse was accelerating, feeding on Eric's life force. His lips had turned blue, and frost began to form on his beard despite the summer warmth. Astrid raised the obsidian blade, its edge catching the strange green light that emanated from the altar's carved runes. The ancient words of the severing ritual felt heavy on her tongue, each syllable requiring tremendous effort to speak. As she began the incantation, the very air round them seemed to thicken, as if reality itself resisted what she was attempting. By blood and bone, by heart and soul, she chanted, her voice growing stronger with each word, I call upon the ancient powers that bind fate to flesh. The blade bit into her palm, and her blood began to flow onto the altar. Where each drop landed, the stone hissed and steamed, releasing wisps of silver smoke that formed intricate patterns in the air. Eric's body convulsed as the curse fought against the ritual's power, the black veins pulsing with malevolent energy. Astrid, stop, he gasped, trying to rise. I won't let you. You don't have a choice, she said firmly, though tears streamed down her face. Neither of us do. She continued the ritual, feeling the life bond between them beginning to strain and fray. It was agony beyond description, as if someone was slowly tearing her soul in half. Through their connection, she could feel Eric's pain as well, doubled and reflected back upon itself in an endless loop of suffering. The grove around them began to change. Ancient trees withered and blackened, their leaves falling like ash. The very ground cracked beneath the altar as forces older than memory stirred to wakefulness. Valdis had warned her that the severing ritual would attract the attention of things best left undisturbed, but there was no turning back now. As Astrid spoke the final words of the incantation, she felt something vast and terrible focusing its attention upon them. The curse that bound Eric wasn't merely the work of a vengeful sorceress. It was a fragment of something much darker, a piece of the primordial chaos that existed before the gods shaped the world. I sever what was joined, Astrid cried, raising the blade high above her head. I break what was made whole. I sacrifice what was precious to save what is beloved. The blade descended toward her heart, but in that final moment, Eric found the strength to move. His hand shot out, grasping the obsidian edge, letting it slice deep into his palm as he stopped its descent. Together, he whispered, his voice filled with grim determination. If we die as one. If we live as one. That is our true bond, not magic but choice. Their blood mingled on the blade, and suddenly the ritual's power doubled, then tripled. The curse shrieked as it was torn from Eric's body, manifesting as a writhing shadow that rose from his skin like smoke. But instead of dissipating, it turned toward them with malevolent intelligence, seeking revenge for its banishment. The ground beneath the altar cracked completely, revealing a chasm that seemed to lead into the heart of darkness itself. From its depths came the sound of something ancient stirring, something that had been waiting for this moment when the barriers between worlds grew thin. Astrid and Eric stood together, their hands joined around the obsidian blade as the consequences of their choice began to unfold around them. The morning mist clung to the sacred grove like the breath of sleeping gods, and Astrid felt the weight of destiny pressing against her chest with each step toward the ancient stone circle. Bjorn walked beside her, his hand clasped tightly in hers, their fingers intertwined as if they could bind their souls together through touch alone. The curse had grown stronger overnight. She could see it in the shadows that now followed him, even in daylight, in the way his breath sometimes caught, as if invisible hands clutched at his throat. The Volva waited at the center of the circle, her weathered face grave as she arranged the ritual implements on the moss-covered altar. Rune stones carved from bone, a ceremonial blade that gleamed with its own inner light, and a silver bowl that would soon hold the essence of their sacrifice. Other members of their clan gathered at the circle's edge, their faces etched with sorrow and understanding. They had lost too many to the dark magic that plagued their lands. "The binding grows weaker with each passing hour," the Volva said, her voice carrying the weight of ancient knowledge. "Soon, even this ritual will not be enough to break what has been wrought." Astrid nodded, her warrior's composure masking the storm that raged within her heart. She had faced berserkers in battle, had stood shield to shield against overwhelming odds, but nothing had prepared her for this moment. The choice between love and duty, between personal happiness and the greater good, threatened to tear her apart. Bjorn squeezed her hand and turned to face her fully. In the pale morning light, she could see the man she had fallen in love with beneath the curse's shadow, the fierce protector who'd once carried her from a burning longhouse, the gentle soul who braided flowers into her hair during peaceful summers, the warrior who had sworn before the gods to stand by her side until Ragnarok itself. "There must be another way," he said, though they both knew his words were born of desperation rather than hope. "I will not see you destroyed for my sake." "And I will not watch the darkness consume you," she replied, reaching up to touch his face. "We swore oaths, my love, to each other, to our people, to honor itself. This curse seeks not just your life, but your very soul. If we do nothing, it will spread like poison through our lands." The Volva began to chant in the old tongue, her words weaving through the morning air like silver threads. The rune stones on the altar began to glow with a soft blue light, and Astrid felt the familiar tingle of magic awakening around them. But this was different from the battle magic she knew. This power demanded truth, sacrifice, and a love strong enough to transcend death itself. "The ritual requires a willing exchange," the Volva explained as her chanting subsided. "A life freely given for a soul freely saved. But know this, the one who makes the sacrifice will not pass to Valhalla. Their essence will be bound to the curse, transforming its nature from destruction to protection. You will become a guardian spirit, watching over this land but never again walking among the living." Astrid felt Bjorn's grip tighten, his entire body tensing as if preparing for battle. She knew he would try to take her place, would attempt to be the one to make the ultimate sacrifice. But the Volva had already explained that the curse's nature demanded it be broken by another. The dark magic that had claimed him could only be undone by one who loved him beyond reason, beyond life itself. "I have lived as a warrior," Astrid said, her voice growing stronger with each word. "Let me die as one dies best, protecting what matters most." Before Bjorn could protest, she stepped forward and placed her hands on the ritual blade. The metal was warm beneath her palms, pulsing with ancient power that seemed to recognize her resolve. Around the circle, their clansmen began to sing the death song of heroes, their voices rising and falling like waves against a distant shore. Bjorn moved to stop her, but the Volva's magic held him in place, keeping him safe within the ritual's bounds. Tears streamed down his face as he spoke her name, his voice breaking with anguish and love. "Remember me," Astrid whispered, meeting his eyes one final time. "Remember us. Let our love be the shield that guards our people when the darkness comes again." She raised the blade high, its light reflecting off the tears on her cheeks like stars scattered across the night sky. The curse writhed around Bjorn like a living thing, sensing its approaching doom, but it was too late to escape the trap she had set with her willing heart. "For love," she said simply, and brought the blade down toward her heart, ready to transform their greatest sorrow into their people's salvation.